Hello and welcome to pmclounge.com. This is Lounge Fever, a series of videos dedicated to answering your questions. Before we proceed, I'd like to remind you, if you have still not checked out our entire playlist on critical path method CPM, please do so. The first link in the description is going to take you to the entire playlist. We talk about every single thing that there is to know about critical path method, CPM, float, early start, early finish, late finish. How do you calculate all of these? And we have also answered your questions, your doubts on this topic. This video will also be a part of that very playlist. So first link in the description, head over there and learn a thing or two more about CPM. And if you have this question, if you would like to know what these three different type of floats are, total float, free float, and independent float, come back to this video and check this out as well. Let's move ahead. So the first thing is total float. Total float is basically the amount of time an activity can be delayed without delaying the project end date. Read this again. The amount of time an activity can be delayed without delaying the project end date. Have you guessed it this year? This total float is actually just another name for your float. Whatever that you understand of float, that is total float as well. So don't get confused if in your exam you get a question and they ask you to select the right answer and you don't see float. They give you this definition and they ask you to select the right answer and you don't see float in the options. All you see is total float. That is going to be the right answer. And if you don't see float and total float, but you see this third thing known as slack, then select this, because float is equals to slack when it comes to PMP exam. So understand this. We have discussed this earlier as well. Float is the same concept as slack as far as PMP is concerned. Now, the second type of float that we are talking about here is free float. So the amount of time an activity can be delayed without delaying the early start of its successors. Now, this is important. So how much can you delay your activity without delaying the early start of the successor activity? So you have this diagram here. This is the same diagram that we have discussed in previous videos as well. If you have forgotten, let me pull this up. This is the reference. This is how the information is filled in the boxes. So let's say activity A, right? This is the early start 0. This is the late start 2. This is the early finish 4. And this is the late finish 6. The central value here 2. This is the float and this is the total duration. So this is how activities are basically represented in the diagram. So what does this say? Let's discuss this again. The amount of time an activity can be delayed without delaying the early start of its successor. So this is the early start of the successor of A. And since this activity is ending at 4 and the early start of its successor is also 4, this activity cannot actually be delayed, right? If it gets delayed to, let's say, 6, this value, then obviously the next successor value, the successor activity will also have a late start. But the definition here says without delaying the early start, not meeting the late start or not delaying the late start, right? We're talking about early start only. So if you see the other activities in this diagram, you can find one here, activity C, which has certain free float in its hand, because you have 8, which is the finish, the early finish for C, but the early start for the successor activity of C, which is G, the early start for this activity is 15. So that means there is a difference between between early finish and early start for C and G. This difference, 8 minus 15, this difference is known as free float. So I hope this was clear. You can go back and read this again if you're still not clear. But this is how free float is calculated. Finally, there's an independent float. So the amount of time an activity can be delayed if the immediate predecessor finishes at its late finish and the immediate successor has to start at its early start. What does this mean? So let's see these three activities. The amount of time an activity can be delayed if the immediate predecessor, so let's talk about this activity. This is the activity in question. The immediate predecessor finishes at late finish. So this is the value at which the predecessor activity is ending. And the immediate successor, this is the immediate successor, the rightmost one. The immediate successor has to start at early start. So this value, let's say this value is 4 and this value is, let's say, 8, right? And the duration of this activity is 2, which means even if you start late in the previous activity, right, you start at 4, you will finish at 6 because 2 is the duration of the middle activity, and early start is 8, which means you have a waiting time of 2. This waiting time is basically the independent float because this is the amount of time an activity can be delayed even if the immediate predecessor is ending at its late finish and the immediate successor can start at its early start. Still, you have some float. 2 is the value of this float, and this is known as independent float. So that's all that we had in this video. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned about these three kind of floats. Do hit the like button if you did and subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload a new video. Don't forget the first link in the description and pmclounge.com, your number one free PMP resource. Don't forget to check that out. Thank you and have a nice day.